and the enablers that enable us to get there. These enablers are an integration of enterprise, entrepreneurship, passion, expertise, technology, research and development, energy, both energy in terms of passion and energy in terms of thinking, in terms of green energy, engineering skills, economics, because any idea has to work in the long run only if it's economical and feasible, and finally expediency, overall feasibility. The scope of my presentation would include global environmental challenges to set the tone for this conference, the statistics for India, the hierarchy of circular solutions, approaches which one uses for treatment of end-of-life waste, including linear economy and circular economy, some case studies, the role of CMAs in this circular economy, and finally some value addition possibilities for CMAs for the corporate sector. Let me begin with the environmental challenges of 2025, and I have relied on a website called earthcore.org, which specializes in news related to environmental issues. The first major challenge that the globe faces is global warming. All of us know about it, we have experienced it year after year. And 2024 turned out to be the hottest year in our history, with the global average temperature rising by 0.12 degrees in 1 year. This per se might look very small, but if you add up over a period of time, and if you see how the concentration of carbon dioxide has increased from 1985 until now, it's a very steep increase, and these greenhouse gases can lead to reflection of heat back onto the planet and therefore global warming. The second biggest challenge is depletion of fossil fuels. We use crude oil, we use coal, we use natural gas and many other fossil fuels and resources which contribute to global warming. Transportation sector alone accounts for 15% of the GHGs that are released. And in spite of the fact that 27 countries have imposed some form of carbon tax, we still don't have a solution to complete substitution of fossil fuels in the foreseeable future. So on the one hand, we are running down on the inventories of fossil fuel, and on the other, we don't have an alternate in place which is viable and sustainable. Food waste accounts for about 6% of the global emissions, and this is just the waste, the food losses and the resulting releases. Then we are losing biodiversity, and 68% of the population of mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians has come to the extent of 68% the population has come down between 1970 and 2016, which is a very substantial drop. We are all aware of plastic pollution, and many of us do not know that a piece of plastic that goes into a landfill or into the ocean takes 400 years for it to degrade, and it persists in the environment. 91% of plastics that have been made so far have not been recycled. And in a conference on circular economy, this is a very significant number. Currently, 14 million tons of plastics go into the ocean every year. And cumulatively, if this is not arrested, even if the rate is not slowed down, it is anticipated that 600 million tons of plastics will enter the oceans by 2040. It's a staggering number. We have seen deforestation taking place all across the globe, and every hour, the equivalent of 300 football fields are cut down. And the result is inability to do carbon sequestration, and also soil erosion. According to the World Health Organization, anywhere between 4.2 and 7 million people lose their lives because of air pollution, directly or indirectly. And the melting of ice caps has been raising ocean levels to the extent that it has been of late rising uh, up to about 3.2 millimeters per year. This number may look insignificant, but there are many islands which are now threatened with their very existence. And even India, which has a coastline of about 7,000 kilometers, will find this a very significant threat in the years to come if we do not take adequate measures. The, the environmental pollution that is created on the planet eventually partially finds its way into the oceans, and acidification of oceans can cause significant damage to marine ecosystems. In agriculture, some of the forms of agriculture and some of the forms of animal husbandry, including livestock, fisheries, fertilizers, these are major contributors to GHG, and the extent is estimated to be about 30%. There is need for plant-based and sustainable farming methods. There is continued degradation of the soil, and 40% of the planet's soil gets degraded as per the UN already. Organic matter that is lost affects both plants and photosynthesis. About only 3% of the water on the planet is fresh water, which is drinkable. And out of 8 billion people, the population of the globe, about 1 billion people don't have access to fresh water. 68 million tons of topsoil get eroded every year, and this in turn affects both water availability and crop cultivation. We do not realize, but fast fashion and discarded clothes, manufacture of textiles also is a major contributor to environmental degradation. And it is estimated that this segment alone contributes about 10% of carbon emissions. It generates about 20% of global wastewater, directly or indirectly. Out of 8 billion people, about 40%, 3 billion, use fish as a major source of nutrition. And with the growing population, there has been overfishing all over the world. And it is estimated that about 30% of commercially fished waters are already overfished. Finally, with EVs and various types of batteries coming to the ecosystem, there is going to be increasing mining, not only of cobalt, but lithium and many other metals. And this also will lead to leaching, dust, and radioactivity. These are the global challenges, and to sum them up, we have rising levels of carbon dioxide, which in turn also lead to global warming and respiratory and other medical issues. We have come across the situation in the north, especially in Delhi, when during the winter months, stubble burning leads to significant increase in particulate matter and carbon dioxide. We have seen unprecedented climate changes, floods, hurricanes, typhoons. Ocean acidity has been rising. There is unmanageable solid waste, and I'll come to that dimension for India in a short while. Wastewater, which is not adequately treated, shortage of water, depletion of all forms of energy resources, fossil and non-fossil. We are essentially borrowing from the future, and I think the word borrowing is quite mild. We are essentially stealing from the future. We are stealing from our children, because when you borrow, you are expected to give back. There's nothing that you'll be able to give back to our children by way of environmental contribution. So we are stealing from them. This has to stop. And we have created a situation of unsustainable and very delicate equilibrium in the entire environment. That was the global economic challenge. Now let me turn to India. Just last week, IQ Air, which is a Switzerland-based institution, has published the World Air Quality Report. And India is ranked fifth most polluted country in the world. The saving grace is it was third most polluted last year. It has now been ranked fifth most polluted. And this is partly because there is a 7% decline in the PM 2.5 concentration in 2024. PM 2.5 means those particles in the air, solid particles, which are less than 2.5 micrometers in size. 13 of the 20 most polluted cities in the world are in India. Delhi has an annual average of PM 2.5 of 93.6 micrograms per cubic meter, as against the maximum recommended level by WHO of 5, which means it's 20 times more polluted than what is recommended for a healthy existence. 35% of Indian cities have a PM 2.5 level, which is 10 times the recommended level by the UN. As a consequence of this, life expectancy has been reduced by about 5.2 years, which is very significant. The sources of particulate matter are vehicle exhaust, industrial emissions, and burning of agricultural waste, such as stubble, about which we read every winter. Let me give you some numbers. And I'm going to talk about only 6 types of solid waste: rubber, plastic, glass, paper, agro waste, and construction demolition waste. C&D waste means when a building is brought down or where the road is repaired, the kind of debris that it generates, that is construction demolition waste. Now the numbers are all here, and I don't want to go into millions of tons of waste that we are generating, but I'll give you certain metrics which are easier to understand and appreciate. So each one of us generates about 2 kilograms per year of rubber waste, about 4 kilograms per year of glass waste, about 13 kilograms per year of paper waste, 16 of plastics, 423 kilograms of agro waste, and 192 kilograms of construction demolition waste. Let me further translate these numbers into something that we can relate to. The total waste that we generate only of these 6 categories, solid waste, is 650 kilograms per year, which means that if an average Indian weighs 65 kilograms, year after year, we generate 10 times of our waste, our weight, as solid waste, only of these categories. And I'm not even including metallic waste, I'm not including non-ferrous metals and many other categories. Now, this is just not sustainable. Most of this goes into landfills, and this is not sustainable. There is no room on the planet to save this kind of waste. This number keeps growing by 7% per year in line with our GDP. And in the rest of the countries, this number is even 3 or 10 or 5 times larger. So you can see the dimension that we are talking about. It is in this background that we will be talking today about approaches towards circular economy. When it comes to linear or circular economy solutions, there is a hierarchy. If you have end-of-life products and you have to dispose them off, the easiest way is to send them to a landfill, and this is what we do most of the time, and that's why we see piles and piles of garbage in towns, cities, villages. This is the most undesirable option, and this is a sign of linear economy or throwaway economy. The next is combustion. So if you have stubble in the fields and there's nothing else you can do, you burn it. You don't get any energy out of it. It just contributes to carbon dioxide. It temporarily solves a problem but creates another type of problem. The next in the hierarchy is used as an energy source. So if there is plastic, and I'll give it the example of a plastic all across so that one can relate with. The plastic is converted into some kind of pellets or foam and added to a multi-fuel boiler furnace where it is burned and its own inherent calorific value is used. But that's all it does. The material value is not utilized, just the heat value is utilized by burning it. And again, it results in carbon dioxide and NOx and SOx and so on. The next in the hierarchy is used to recover fuel. And this is a process called pyrolysis, and I won't go into technical details, but the material is burnt in the absence of oxygen at a very high temperature. It results in gaseous fuel, liquid fuel, and solid fuel, which then can be used for various purposes. Next is low end uses. So if you have mixed plastics and if you cannot segregate them, you can convert them into some kind of pellets which are then mixed with bitumen and used for road paving. So these are low tech applications where at least you have some level of circularity in the system. After that comes reuse, which of course is one of the most ideal situations, but I'm assuming that most of these are end of life where reuse is not possible. Then comes recycling, mechanical recycling. And for instance, if we look at PET bottles, they can be recycled through a mechanical means and converted into polyester staple fiber, into sportswear and various forms of polyester clothing. That is mechanical recycling. And then there is upcycling. You can even convert them into more value-added products. For instance, some people have converted multi-layer plastics into very fashionable handbags, which are handmade, and each one is unique in its design and character. Now, this is upscaling because you are converting something into even a higher value added material. So, this is the hierarchy in which one should endeavor as CMAs when you look at the possibilities of treating solid waste or waste of any kind. It's good to keep in mind the hierarchy so that one can try to go as high up in the order as possible. I'll use the same pyramid to show how it applies to end of life tires. And here the end of life tires could either go to a landfill, which is even banned in European Union, it's not allowed, or it can go as a fuel into cement kilns and into other energy recovery forms like mixed solid boiler feed. It can go into material feed to convert into crumb rubber, which can be used for sports surfaces and road blending for bitumen. Or the rubber can be put through a chemical and mechanical process into what is called a reclaimed rubber, which is a complete cycle. And that reclaimed rubber can go back into a fresh tire and the cycle continues. And that is true circularity. The disadvantages of some of the approaches are if one goes to a landfill, there are fire hazards, apart from the fact that the planet doesn't have so much of land available for landfills. There are fire hazards, environmental pollution. It's a very inefficient use of space, which should be used ideally for growing crops or for having solar plants. Uh, it can lead to slow decomposition, it can lead to infestation, breeding ground for insects. And there is a total ban on landfills at certain times in European Union. If it is used for energy recovery and only for energy recovery but not material recovery, only 16% of the energy used in manufacturing can be captured back. The rest is wasted. And it can be a source of environmental pollution and the carbon footprint. If one were to retread some rubber and the tires, for instance, the tires can be retreaded once or twice, but even that's a very manual labor intensive process. It needs very careful sorting and inspection. And sometimes there are economical and other limitations. So the ideal solution would be to go in the case of tires, reclaim rubber, which would then complete the circularity loop. When we and you saw that pyramid where you saw that as we go up, there is greater value created and extracted from the end of life products. This is a chart made by McKinsey, the strategy company, and it talks of three types of waste: PET, uh, rubber, that is tires, and electronic waste. And I don't want you to go into detail in the numbers, but essentially what it means is there is a low-tech application, it's very basic, there's an advanced application, and there's a full technological recycling method. And if you take PET, if you use the very basic methodology of just recovering energy and not the material value, you lose about 105 to $145 per ton. If you use recycling mechanical into polyester fiber, you gain about 155 to $315 per ton in that range. But if you do bottle to bottle recycling, which is the most advanced form of PET recycling, where you need special equipment, and you can make a PET bottle starting with a end of life bottle, you can generate up to 360 or even $590 per ton of PET. Similarly, for tires, if you do just metal recovery, the steel cord, it's about $10 to $15 per ton. If you do tire derived fuel, just the fuel value and not the material value, it's about $75 to $130. And if you do complete recycling using crumbs, then you can go up to $300 per ton. And similarly for electronic waste. So as one goes up the hierarchy of waste treatment, there is greater and greater value to be derived, apart from the fact that there is much less of degradation of the environment at each stage. I would now deal with the models for circular economy. And I know that there are going to be more presentations on this subject later, so I'm not going to go into detail. But just to give an overview, the World Economic Forum has classified 5 forms of circular economy. These are circular inputs, where you use recycled materials to make fresh products. Then sharing economic concept, for instance, a forklift or a certain machinery or warehouses that are shared among people instead of having fresh investments made in each factory or each location. Products as a service, where, for instance, in the case of SKF, where they supply ball bearings, they take care of the oil which goes into lubrication. And as the oil gets contaminated, they take the oil back, reprocess it, and supply it back. So it's a service rather than a one-time sale. And I know Dr. Gupta is going to give more examples of this in the course of his presentation. Uh, Product use extension. Can you repair the end of life product somehow, put it back into use, and even refurbish it? And some of the examples are retreading of tires, where you can the tire which has lost its tread can be retreaded and put back on the road. And finally, resource recovery, that is completely dismantling the product. For instance, Vodafone takes back cell phones and then it dismantles them, or automobiles that are dismantled, and each part, metal, glass, rubber, plastic, is treated separately. And the intention is to recover as much of material and energy as possible without much of environmental degradation. So these are the models. The first is a linear model, which is called a throwaway model. You start with a raw material, fresh raw material, make a product, use the product, and then it goes into waste. It's a one-time use. This is the worst possible option for any usage. Then the next is recycling economy, where whatever is made is used and then converted back into the raw material, fed into the loop, and it goes around as many times as possible. For instance, when it comes to PET bottles, with bottle to bottle recycling, the this loop can be completed at least 7 times without losing much of mechanical properties, until it starts losing mechanical properties. And now the research is aimed at creating more and more of additives, so that the life could be extended further, the number of cycles can be extended further. And then there is a final circular economy model, where it's not just recycling, but it can also cover return, reuse, repair, and manufacturing as a loop. These are the various advantages that the circular economy gives us. It's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, it's good for job creation, it's growth without degrading the environment. There are various models which have been used for better planet management, and one of the most well known is Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. And even if one were to go through these 17 goals, one would see that quite a few of them are aimed at creating a good environmental system. So you will see, for instance, climate action, life below water, life on the land, uh, there is clean water and sanitation, and so on. So there are goals which are essentially meant for circularity and better environmental management. Similarly, when it comes to chemistry and production of chemicals, and chemicals are such an inherent part of our lives that we often don't realize the kind of role that it plays. But if you look around and touch any item in this auditorium, you would find some chemical which has gone to its manufacturer. So chemicals are very important. And when it comes to green chemistry, which is now the form of chemistry which is in vogue, there are 12 principles, and even here, making chemicals which can be recycled, making chemicals from biodegradable materials, making chemicals in a safe way, making chemicals which have a life cycle analysis which is very positive. These are part of the principles of green chemistry, which in turn are used in design of products, design of plants, design of equipment. The, the process of recycling is something which would be of very great interest to CMAs because it's a multi-step process, and very often we do not realize how many steps are involved in a simple recycling of, say, a PET bottle. And I keep citing PET because PET is the most recycled plastic in the world, and that is because of the fact that it's very easy to segregate. And typically, even in a country like India, where segregation and collection is not very sophisticated, 80 to 90% of PET is being recycled, as against 8% plastic overall. So PET is a highly recycled plastic. And if you see the value chain, it begins with sorting. Of course, there is collection from various households and railways and airports and hotels. From there, it goes to sorting because it's a mixed waste, which has glass, which is rubber, which is multi-layer plastics. It has food waste and so on. So sorting is one of the most important parts of the chain. Then it goes to crushing of the bottles, baling them, flaking them, convert them to flakes so that they are easy to transport and occupy less space. Washing is a very important step because there will be all kinds of contamination. Then melting it, extruding into pellets. And those pellets then go into the final product, which could be a polyester staple fiber, polyester filament yarn, or even a bottle. And then that bottle ultimately is at the end of the life gets back into the loop, and then this linear model becomes a circular model. Uh, I'm highlighting this because as far as cost accounting is concerned, each step becomes important. And if you look at the value chain, you will see that it starts at the unorganized end, not even micro enterprises, the rag pickers. They start this value chain. And then it moves to the unorganized small sector, then the small to medium sector, and eventually the end users, maybe a distillery or maybe a Coca-Cola or maybe a Pepsi, would be a very large scale industry. So it spans the entire economic size of companies and corporations and individuals, starting with a small rag picker all the way to very large corporations. And at each stage, the cost accounting becomes an important process. I will now turn to some case studies of various models of circularity, starting with Unilever. Unilever has announced that by 2025, that is the current year, all their packaging will be either 100% recyclable or reusable or compostable, that the plastic that we choose. Now, multi-layer packaging in which we see biscuits and snacks and various other products packed, they are the most difficult to deal with because it's not just one plastic, which is easier to recycle, but it's an amalgam of different types of polymers and even metals. Sometimes aluminum is included, and that becomes very difficult. So now, world over, and then there is printing ink, which also gets into the system. The world over now, the trend is to move away from these kinds of multi-layer plastics into plastics which are either biodegradable or are easier to recycle. This is the target that Unilever has set for itself. It has also come up with refill stations. So if runs out of tomato ketchup, or one runs out of milk, or one runs out of any other liquid product, one can go to a filling station, get it filled in the existing container, and bring it back. Uh, this has led to reduction of 12% use of virgin plastics from since 2018, and about 100,000 tons of post-consumer recycled plastics have been used in 2024. Then the sportswear maker Adidas, they have started using ocean-based plastic. Now, ocean-based plastics is something which is a very important subject. All along the coastline, all across the planet, plastics go into the ocean, and they completely spoil the ecosystem of the ocean. It leads to microplastics, it leads to, and those microplastics eventually through the food chain come back into individuals and harm them. So it is very necessary that plastics do not end up in the ocean but are captured in time and brought back. So they have used ocean fishing nets. Um, they have used PET bottles and similar products from ocean plastics, and 50 million pairs of shoes have been made from these ocean plastics since, in 2024, which is equivalent to 500 million plastic bottles. This is what they have saved by way of circularity. IKEA takes back used furniture. There are some people who, after a while, want to change their furniture, which may still be in good condition. They have created what are called as is stores, where this furniture, if necessary, is refurbished and offered at a discount. And in the process, about 120,000 pieces were sold in the first year, saving about 15,000 tons of plastics going into landfills. There is a company called Interface which makes nylon based carpets. And they have decided that they would use discarded fishing nets, which are made of nylon, for the underlay of the carpets. And in 2024, they collected 2,000 tons of fishing nets. And fishing nets are not easy to reprocess because they also have elements of copper. So copper has to be separated from nylon, and then the nylon has to be recycled. But they have done that. And in the process, they have supplemented income to 2,200 families. There is a company called Patagonia which makes clothes and apparel, and they have offered that they would freely take back whatever clothes people want to return. If they are repairable and they want to be repaired, then they would repair them and give them back to the original customer. If the original customer does not want it, then they would repair them and offer them for sale elsewhere. And in the process, if there's some form of clothing which is just not repairable, they would recycle it in various forms through its constituents. There's a company called Too Good to Go, and what they do is they have an online app which connects restaurants, bakeries, and supermarkets. And wherever there's surplus food, which is of good quality, edible quality, they would manage to collect them, get information disseminated, and sell it at a low price so that the food is not wasted, and to that extent, the greenhouse gas emissions are restricted. A company called Shido uses paper embedded with seeds. So at the end of the use, the paper can be planted and it can lead to fresh cultivation of plants. And finally, there is a company called Ecozap, which uses end-of-life tires and bottle caps to make shoes, the footwear and soles. So these are just some of the case studies of the consciousness that has been created about circular economy, and the fact that companies, communities, societies, nations are endeavoring to do whatever they can to reverse the damage that we have caused in the last several decades to the environment. Now I come to the main theme of this conference. What role can CMAs play in the circular economy? I have categorized this, my thoughts into three parts. The first part deals with what role CMAs can play in a typical company. The second is what they can play as being advisors to the government and regulatory bodies. And the third is what role they can play in evaluating new technologies such as EVs. Let me start with the first one. Uh, Sustainability comes at a cost. And we all know that there is an investment, there is a capex investment one time, and there's also recurring opex investment. And one needs to be aware of what this additional investment is. It has to be eventually financially sustainable, otherwise the model would not work. And if it just does not work, then it needs government intervention or some kind of intervention to subsidize the loss that is being suffered. So that quantification is very essential, and this is where CMS can play a role. There are models um, for the entire recycling loop, but as I mentioned earlier, the entire model starts at the very unorganized end, at the rag picking end, and where waste is solid waste is sorted into solid waste. How do you calculate the cost of these? It's a very complex. Is it activity-based costing? Is it costing based on hours put in? Is it costing based on effort put in? So this is going to be a very challenging and very interesting way of dealing with the situation. Then, even for currently for large corporates and large listed companies, but eventually this might come down to even the medium-sized company. There is already the reporting under BRSR, the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report, and there is going to be further addition of ESG reporting. Now, this will need a great deal of information, and when it comes to ESG reporting, one would need to look at the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, which is the emissions generated within the company, what is bought out, and what is brought in by way of transportation, so on. So these are the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions along the value chain. So all the suppliers, the company itself, and all the customers. And this will need not only the large volume of data, but also methodologies to collect the data, assimilate the data, process the data, and come out with a matrix. This is ideally the role of a CMA in the years to come. Then there is great emphasis, especially when it comes to exports to European Union. They would like to trace everything back to a farm. For instance, if it's a bio-based raw material, they would want to know, and if it's converted into, say, bio-based nylon, they would want to know which farm the castor oil came from, which in turn led to the first derivative and the second derivative, sebacic acid, and eventually to nylon-based bags. The traceability, which again means a substantial collection of data and tracking. In European Union and the US, this is not yet happened in India, but there is a premium that people are willing to pay for green products. And when there's a green label, they would not mind paying 5 or 10% premium over a non-green product. But for this to be established, again, it needs significant cost calculation. Then some countries have banned import of waste altogether, but India has allowed select waste to be brought in. So should we import waste and process it and add value and put them in circular loop? Or should we not, and if should we use local waste and so on? So there are optional cost calculations to be made. There are products which have multiple feedstocks or multiple co-products. For instance, let's take a cell phone, or let's take any laptop or any electronic material. There will be plastics, there will be metals, there will be noble metals, there will be very exotic metals. And these metals will have to be sorted out and then again reassembled. When it comes to batteries, it will be lithium. So one would need to again get into the economics and of each of these and create cost models. I talked about the hierarchy of circularities. Now it looks very good on paper, but at each step there is a cost benefit analysis, and that is something that the CMS can contribute to. Uh, there is a concept I mentioned briefly of pyrolysis, which is the waste is taken, it is put through high temperature combustion chamber without oxygen, and it is split into gaseous, liquid, and solid fuel. That liquid fuel becomes a fuel feed for the cracker. Cracker is the one where one produces plastics, or eventually plastics, rubber, fibers, intermediate. So that's a complete loop where the one starts with crude oil, one then converts into certain feedstocks through a process. Eventually, when you end up with this kind of liquid fuel, that again becomes a feedstock, and it gets blended with the original feedstock, original crude oil, and you get a blend. And then in Europe, one can certify that this product is say 10% green, which means that the feedstock had 10% of material coming in through the recycle route and 90% crude oil coming from the well. This again means a great deal of calculation, certification, and modeling. Then life cycle analysis. There is the model of cradle to grave, which is a one step the linear economy, versus cradle to cradle, which is complete recycle. And when you would often find that in many recycled products, the initial cost may be high, but if you cost the product over a life cycle, it becomes economical. And I'll give you an example of a product which I'm very familiar with. This is a product which is made from recycled rubber and plastic, and it is used in multiple applications as a substitute for wood, natural wood. Now, the initial cost is much higher, maybe two times higher than the equivalent wood, but it has a much longer life. It does not get degraded by bacterial and algae and other attacks, and therefore it's water resistant compared to wood. So it has multiple benefits. Now, if all these are built into the model, it might be easier to convince a potential customer to invest more to begin with in a green product, knowing that over a life cycle it will have significant benefits compared to an ostensibly cheaper product to begin with. This again needs a lot of modeling and calculation. Then value chain analysis and traceability. And I gave the example of nylon bags and how starting with castor oil in a farm, one goes through various steps to make biodegradable nylon bags which are used for collecting waste. Sooner or later, as the ESG reports become more and more popular, we will have circularity matrix, and this again is another opportunity for CMAs to contribute to. And as I said earlier, for the entire value chain of recycling, starting with collection, sorting, logistics, and so on, all the way to the reverse logistics, there is costing to be done at each stage, and who could do it better than CMAs? So these are some of the areas where CMAs can contribute to individual companies. Now let me turn to the government advisory role. European Union has already introduced carbon tax even for those countries which export to the European Union. It's starting with steel and cement and a few other products, and it will eventually extend to many more products. Which means that if I am manufacturing cement in India and I'm going to export the cement to European Union, I'll need to pay carbon tax because I am degrading the environment even if it's not being done in the Europe. At a global level, I am degrading the environment, and under the polluter pays principle, I have to pay for it. Now, this carbon tax has to be calculated, and for that, there are vested interests. There will be various, when carbon tax comes to India eventually, there would be various lobbies which would have different views and different arguments. And it needs a neutral body, such as the institute, which could really take a holistic view in the entire matter. Similarly, we have already, as a country, introduced extended producer responsibility models, the EPR models, where for plastics and rubber, we have started levying certain credits and penalties. Uh, so, if a company like, say, Unilever uses certain plastics in its packaging, and if it is not using up to say 20-30% of recycled plastic in the overall packaging, it has to buy credits. And and those credits have been generated by those who are in the recycling process. So it's a buyer-seller market. And for each type of recycling, there are different weightages given. Now, here again, there are lobbies and there are arguments and various um, positions taken by various people along the value chain. And the institute would be the best position to take a neutral, holistic view to recommend to the government what should be the weightage for each type of recycling. Similarly, carbon credit evaluation for each company and each government. Balancing of interests among brand owners, that is, companies like Hindustan Unilever or Pepsi, recyclers and end users. How do you balance their interests in the EPR credits? And finally, there are institutions like the State Pollution Control Board, Ministry of Environment and Finance. Some of them, when it comes to a new facility, impose certain requirements in terms of waste treatment, solid, liquid, gaseous, which may not be viable. And it needs the intervention of some neutral body, such as the Institute, to say that out of these three approaches, this is the one which is viable, this is not viable, and therefore not advisable. So this is where I believe CMAs can play a significant role in advising the government. And finally, it comes to technology evaluation. There are broad technologies which are being developed in the world. For instance, EV. Now, many of us feel that when we drive an electric vehicle, we are solving the entire problem of circularity. We are not emitting any carbon dioxide. But we forget that the energy comes from somewhere. It has to be generated somewhere. And it gets generated in a power plant, then it gets transmitted to a battery, and the battery then gives us the energy, and then the whole cycle continues. So we are essentially shifting the pollution source from the road to the power plant. Is this a viable model? And if not, what are the other viable models? So that's how the whole hydrogen economy has come up. The green hydrogen economy then does not need to answer this question because there is no carbon being generated anywhere, either on the road or in the power plant. The green hydrogen costing, the United States has set a target of 111, that is 1 kilogram of hydrogen would cost not more than $1 over the next 1 decade. But this again, there are various types of electrolysis processes, alkaline, acidic. I don't want to go into details, but it needs considerable cost intervention, including the logistics cost. Hydrogen is very difficult to transport, so one needs to do the cost calculation. Similarly, in India, we have been insisting that we should have a certain alcohol blended into gasoline, 10%, 20%. And there is a government subsidy element to it to make it all viable. There are different kinds of excise duties and GST norms. But there is a limit to which this subsidy can be extended. So here again, I see a very significant role of CMAs. Uh, while we do conventional costing, the World Bank has for long been advocating that we do shadow costing, where we build into the costing the environmental degradation cost. And this is another opportunity. And finally, when it comes to multiple routes, and I believe there is a separate session later on for PET recycling, so I'm not going to it, but PET can be handled in 4 different ways. And for each technology, what are the initial costs and what are the recurring costs and benefits? Those can be addressed by CMAs. I now come to the last part of my presentation, which is not directly related to the theme of this conference. But having got this opportunity to interact with you, I wanted to share my experience in various companies. So, as Dr. Jain mentioned, I have been fortunate in being on the boards of many companies. And in the process, I have been associated with audit committees, either as a chairman or a member or a special invitee. And when I started dealing with the cost audit reports, I found that a typical audit committee does not spend even 5 minutes on a cost audit report. It's a very voluminous report, which is the more the SKUs, the bulkier the report. And it comes in, even the audit committee members don't have the time or inclination typically to go through them. It's a 5 minute agenda item to be completed because it's statutorily required. It goes to the board, which probably spends even less than 5 minutes, and the year's process is done. I am not a cost accountant, but I did take a course in cost accounting. And in my own professional career, I had used the support of cost accountants to a significant extent because I belong to an industry, chemical industry, where under the same roof you can have 5 or 6 reactions taking place sequentially, A going to B, going to C, going to D. And at each step you can have buy or make or sell or convert and so on. So cost accounting to me is extremely important. So I took two initiatives as a member of the audit committee. One was to set apart at least half an hour to have a personal meeting with the cost accountant concerned, the cost auditor concerned, and two, give in advance a series of questions to the cost auditor to answer so that they can bring in insights into the management, into the whole cost process, which in turn can give insights to the management. With this background, I will mention to you what, and this was a very rewarding process. And not only the audit committee, but if the board started realizing the kind of mistakes that were being made in companies and the kind of value that cost accountants and cost and management accountants can bring in. So I'm extremely happy with this initiative, and I wanted to share that initiative with you before I close. So essentially, what we request the cost and management accountants to do is to give us an indication of capacity utilization, which is there in the cost audit reports hidden somewhere, but it's not quantified. Now, in one company, when they quantified that the company was running at, let's say, 70% capacity, and if it were to run at, say, 90%, this is the kind of additional value it would bring to the stakeholders. It was it came as a big surprise to the audit committee and the board. Maybe the management knew about it, but the audit committee did not. And then they started going into the ways and means by which the capacity utilization could be increased. Similarly, customer-wise profitability, at least for the top 10 customers. There are perceptions that certain customers contribute very significantly to a company, but when you get into individual profitability calculation, you find that between what is perceived and what is the actual reality, there is a gap. Uh, in India, we have a tariff. These days, tariff is a very popular word, and everybody is aware of what it means. We have, though the president of one country feels we have a very high tariff, but they have come down substantially from 1992, when they used to be about 130%. Now they are down to about 7% on an average. So when you when there is a protection in the form of tariffs, sale within the country is usually more profitable than export. All the more so because export also involves a logistics cost, selling to the USA or to Latin America or to Europe. But in some companies, for whatever reason, or for approval and so on, or green products and green chemistry, there is a higher realization in terms of net back after netting out warehousing, logistics, and so on, and therefore exports become more interesting. Now, when this was discussed with the audit committee, they realized that in one particular company, it was far better off exporting its products than selling it locally, and therefore the mix got altered over a period of time. And once this gets known to the audit committee and the board, they start devising matrix and monitoring it, and the management also gets the incentive to move in that direction. Similarly, benchmarking of costs vis-a-vis competition, the best practices. Um, when there are multiple SKUs, there are companies which have 500, 1000 SKUs, and you find that there are some which contribute so little that it's really a question whether one should go in for so many SKUs or consolidate them. When there is a value chain, long value chain, as I mentioned, especially in chemical and other industry, at each stage, it's worthwhile seeing whether one should buy that intermediate or one should make it or one should convert it downstream or one should sell it. And this is a very dynamic situation because prices keep changing. Um, there are, when one interacts with the cost auditor, one realizes that there are certain products which with negative variable margin. Now, if this is done as an introductory measure for a strategic reason, one can understand. But if it continues quarter after quarter, it's a matter of concern, and then the company needs to take a tough call whether to continue with the product or ideally reduce costs so that the product becomes profitable. Uh, focal areas for cost reduction. Some of the cost reduction measures that some companies took came up as a result of this interaction with the cost auditor. And the kind of fishbone diagrams that they generated and showed where the hidden costs were. Uh, there are also merits and demerits of purchasing on a long-term contract versus spot, and similarly selling on a long-term contract versus spot. And these again vary from industry to industry, product to product, but cost auditors and cost accountants are in a position to even review these in hindsight and contribute. Uh, Margin management based on replacement cost, when there is great deal of volatility in pricing, one cannot have a static model. It has to be a dynamic model where on a replacement cost basis, is it worthwhile manufacturing some product and selling it? And if so, what should the new price be? Now, these live models can come from CMAs. Forex management efficacy. Then, of course, all of us know that when it comes to trade remediation measures, anti-dumping duty, safeguard duty, countervailing duty, CMA's reports are mandatory, and even the government departments have several CMAs looking over all the cost sheets and cost data. When one has the flexibility of generating power in-house versus buying from a grid versus buying from an exchange versus buying from a JV for green energy, again, it's a monthly model or a quarterly or a fortnightly model that can be developed. Circularity metrics that we discussed, and I know there is a session on that subject. The cost of sustainability, additional cost of sustainability, and what is the price premium that it results in. Extended producer responsibility that I referred to, and any similar strategic inputs for portfolio analysis. For instance, every product has a life cycle, and the product would grow, reach a peak, and then start falling, either because of its own inherent limitations or competition coming in, or competitive products coming in. So in this particular process, many companies have devised certain matrix that they would keep churning their portfolio by having newer and newer products. And those newer products are expected to form a certain targeted percentage, let's say 25% in any year of the total revenue. This is the kind of input that the CMAs can give to audit committees and boards to make sure that they're on track when it comes to these kinds of metrics. In conclusion, we have huge environmental challenges which are real and urgent. They need to be addressed fully, and I must compliment the Institute for organizing this event today on a very relevant theme. It shows the kind of consciousness that the Institute has about the importance of maintaining a green environment. The damage that has been done already cannot be undone, but it can be reversed. And this needs integration of certain enablers, which are enterprise, expertise, engineering, energy, economics, and expediency. CMAs have a significant role, as I explained, in making this possible. And I would really want governments, corporate sector, NGOs, and communities to take the maximum support of CMAs in contributing to a green environment. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.